Welcome to the 3 Down Nation podcast. I'm John Hodge, joined by JC Abbott. JC, the Jumbo Cheese, how are you doing today?
I am doing well. I had an early morning, Hodge. Couple of meetings, a radio hit, so I'm dragging my butt a little bit. Hopefully it won't affect the podcast.
Are you a big coffee guy? I don't think you are.
I'm not a coffee guy. I drink it if I'm absolutely desperate, but I prefer to drink hot chocolate like I'm a toddler.
Hot chocolate like a toddler. I love it. I don't smoke. I don't do drugs. I don't drink. But I do occasionally like to have a Red Bull and then some coffee and then some more coffee and then maybe a Red Bull. And I know the energy drinks are bad for me, but if it's my only vice outside of, I guess, fast food, which might be considered a vice in the eyes of some people, I think I'm doing okay. But who knows? Maybe 20 years from now, they'll be doing studies on me because I'll be radioactive or something like that. Some of those drinks are a little bit sketchy.
It's true. I'm not a big energy drink guy, but caffeine just doesn't have a whole lot of effect on me. So there's not really a point because they don't taste good. So if I'm not feeling the effects, I'm not down with those things.
You raise an interesting point. Some of the energy drinks literally taste like plutonium, or at least what I imagine plutonium would taste like. I can't say I've ever tasted plutonium. And they're simultaneously bad and delicious. Like, if you feel this way, hit me up on Twitter or Blue Sky. Please follow us all, 3 Down Nation. All of us, our folks, are mostly now on Blue Sky. But let me know, because they don't taste good, but they taste delicious. Does that make sense? It doesn't make sense. They simultaneously taste bad and good. It does. It's like Pandora's energy drink. It doesn't make
caffeine
sense.
is addictive.
Yeah,
So
it is. But
that's an addictive response that you're experiencing, Hodge.
well, but like I wouldn't drink puddle water with caffeine added in. That would taste disgusting. The energy drinks, I do like the taste, but I also don't like the taste. It makes no sense. It makes no sense. I digress. Today we're discussing big time hirings in 3 CFL cities.
A future Hall of Famer re-upping in Winnipeg.
A former CFL player being nominated in the NFL's highest honor.
A record-setting performance by a Canadian college quarterback.
And a veteran defensive tackle stepping away from the game. But first, according to an exclusive report from our very own Justin Dunk, who I believe will be back on the show next week, by the way, the Saskatchewan Roughriders have re-signed veteran quarterback Trevor Harris for the 2025 season. The soon-to-be 39-year-old led the CFL in passer efficiency last season and helped the Riders reach the West Final, but also missed 6 games with an MCL sprain. Is that the right move for Saskatchewan now and for the future?
I think it's the right move for Saskatchewan for 2025 if they can begin to work on a succession plan for Trevor Harris. I think if you look at the body of work when he's been on the field, Harris is among the few CFL quarterbacks that you can count in the elite category. Based on the second half of last season, I think he was one of the top 3 passers in the league. He was playing some exceptional football down the stretch. But he is 39, and you know that he's going to miss some time. And as much as Shea Patterson says he wants to be back in Saskatchewan and performed reasonably well while Harris was missing last year, I don't think he's your guy long-term going forward in a post-Harris era. Trevor can get it done for now, but you've got to find out who that next guy is because you may only have him for 1 more season or 2 more seasons at most. And right now, I'm not sure who that is in Saskatchewan. Maybe it's Jack Cohn, the former Notre Dame quarterback. I know they were high on him. Maybe they saw something in practice from him that indicates that he'll be the guy in the future. Or maybe it's somebody on their neg list that we have yet to meet and do not know about yet. But they have to find that next guy because Harris is good as a placeholder and he can get you to the playoffs and he can get you wins. But long term, if you don't find the next guy, you're going to be screwed as an organization.
I agree with all that, JC. I hesitate to give any really firm declaration for my opinion on this deal until we see the financials. That being said, I think that there's a good chance that the Riders got a bit of a bargain here. I mean, Trevor Harris made $473,000 in hard money last year. He had some incentives to get closer to $500,000, third highest paid QB in the league. But coming off, again, a second season where he missed meaningful time due to injury, like he's only played 17 regular season games over the last 2 years. That's just under half, right, of those available contests. That's not a good number. And injuries do very much negatively impact you when it comes time to negotiate your next deal. So my guess is the Riders might have even got him for a little bit less than they paid him in 2024. That being said, as you mentioned, he played at an all-star level. He was named All-West Division, 20 touchdowns, 9 picks, and 12 starts. Didn't have a great West final, but he was also playing a defense that was simply not going to be broken on that particular day. Same couldn't be said for the defense the next week in the Grey Cup, but we digress. As far as Harris is concerned, obviously no. At 39, he's not your future. That being said, let's remember that Trevor Harris didn't become a starter at the professional level until he was almost 30 years old. Like, he is a youthful 38. He takes tremendous care of his body. He won't turn 39 until the end of May. And as far as that next guy you're talking about, JC, like, I would agree at this point that the next guy is not Shea Patterson. But looking across the available quarterbacks, there's guys like Dustin Crum, Caleb Evans, who are still on the young side. But the only guy I look at who's a pending free agent, who is young and really looks like they could be a star quarterback in the CFL for the next 10 years is Trey Ford. And I don't seriously believe that Trey Ford is going to hit the free agent market. And if he does, there's no way Saskatchewan is going to be able to pay him the most money. So if you're the Riders looking at all the available quarterbacks, there's no blue chip young stud like a Drew Brown last year, or like we've seen previously where guys are coming off the rookie deals and there's an incumbent in place, right? So I don't think there was that guy for Saskatchewan. So for that reason, I think this is a clever signing for the Riders. My prediction still is the backup in 2025 will be Jake Maier, who is still a relatively young quarterback. Yes, came off a poor season this year, but let's also call a spade a spade. Nobody in Calgary looked very good this year. If he gets a chance to restart his career under Mark Mueller, the OC, who was his quarterback's coach previously with the Stampeders, I'm led to believe those two are still close. I think that he could potentially be the guy for the future. And I love that you brought up Jack Cohn as well. Former Notre Dame guy. Next year's year 2, I think maybe we start to see a little bit of him during the regular season, depending on how things shake out. But to me, he is a project still for 2026, right? Generally speaking, guys need a few years to get their feet wet. And you can look at Trevor Harris for that. The guy didn't attempt more than 100 passes combined his first 3 years in the league. So if there's an argument for bringing guys along slowly, Trevor Harris is the perfect guy. By year 4, he had 3 touchdown passes, 1 pick. That's nothing, right? So I think long-term, Jack Cohn might be the guy. I think Jake Maier is a good reclamation project, but Trevor Harris is a guy who I do believe can win you a Grey Cup in 2025. I don't see how you don't like this as a Rider fan.
And I think that's an excellent strategy. If you bring in Jake Maier as sort of an older backup who's got that starting experience, he's going to be an upgrade when and if Trevor Harris gets hurt over somebody like Shea Patterson last year. And you can assess him, try and fix the problems he had in Calgary. Maybe he gets another shot as a starter down the line in Saskatchewan, like we've seen various other sort of bust quarterbacks get that next opportunity and shine in the past. I think the other element of this too, Hodge, which you didn't touch on, is it's really important for this team to have a veteran quarterback. Corey Mace is going into year 2 as a head coach. He's not that old, right? He's not that experienced in that role as much as we love him in that role. And Mark Mueller, same thing as the offensive coordinator. I think having somebody like Trevor Harris, who has seen it all, done it all, can sort of assist his OC in a way that other quarterbacks may not be able to, is really good when you've got a young and up-and-coming coaching staff like the Riders do. Harris's experience cannot be undervalued.
Yeah, Mark Mueller, for the record, 3 years younger than his starting quarterback of Trevor Harris. Harris and Corey Mace were born in different years, but they're like 6 months apart. They're very, very close in age. So it's funny that there are so many people in Riderville running the show in their late 30s, offensively and as the head coach. I also think we shouldn't discount the possibility of the Riders signing someone brand new as their potential future. Like Jack Cohn could be the guy. He might also be the worst CFL quarterback, quite literally, of all time. We don't know, right? He is a question mark. He is a wild card. But let's not forget that with the UFL possibly collapsing after this upcoming season in the spring of 2025, that's been reported that the league could be in peril. Also, we know that there are still quarterbacks who are holding on to their college eligibility. They're in year 5, year 6, year 7, heaven forbid, year 8 of their collegiate careers. So with those two things potentially changing, more guys aging out of the college system with the extra eligibility afforded to them by the COVID-19 pandemic, and with fewer potential professional landing spots for them, we could still see a bit of a boon, a bit of a boost to the quarterback rankings in the Canadian Football League. So yes, Jack Cohn could be the guy, but this goes for not just Saskatchewan, for all these other teams. They might be going, hey, the caliber of quarterback that we might soon be getting out of college is going to be higher than it has been certainly in the last 5 years. And that could change the landscape of the league at least a little bit. So I still think Trevor Harris is the right guy for right now. I still think the Riders have plenty of opportunities to plan for the future.
The Edmonton Elks have officially named Mark Killum as their new head coach. It appears that endorsements from former players, including one published here on 3 Down Nation, were the deciding factor in landing the former Calgary special teams coordinator the job. It appears the Lethbridge native has already been hard at work, with Jordan Maximic and JC Sherritt set to join his staff as coordinators. Will this be a winning formula in the former City of Champions?
Yes. I am very bullish, not only on Mark Killum as a head coach, but also this staff. And by the way, for those who don't know, generally speaking, the first thing you're asked in an interview as a head coach is, who are your coordinators going to be? And guys can get hired or not hired based on the quality of those assistants. And yes, there's kind of a process that takes place interview-wise for who eventually gets the job. But by and large, these things are determined behind closed doors ahead of time. And Mark Killum, I mean, any first-time head coach can run the risk of having a tough time putting together a staff, because you need to have some of it's luck, right? Guys need to be available. The stars need to align. But also, guys need to believe in what you're building, right? We've seen some coaches, maybe more towards the end of their careers, have a tough time bringing people in just because they don't have that tenure on their contract. I think the Elks giving Mark Killum a 3-year deal is a great vote of confidence. I think that speaks to what new president and CEO Chris Morris said in his introductory press conference when he said, we're going to stop the revolving door, which I think was a very thinly veiled shot at Chris Jones, who liked to change his starting strong side linebacker every week, it seemed, for portions of the last few years, in addition to other things. But Mark Killum, I mean, you look at not just the former players, but even some of the current players. Like, there's current Stampeders who are touting the hiring of the Edmonton Elks, which is wild, considering that those two teams, historically speaking, hate each other, right? And you've got guys in the NFL, Alex Singleton, who had Killum as a coach. You've got guys who are retired now who love Killum as a coach, and them speaking out. I thought the best moment of Killum's press conference was when he started to thank those players and got emotional. It seemed to catch him off guard, like, whoa, where did that come from? I didn't think I would be getting emotional, but him talking about the passion that his former players showed for him, I think was sensational. It was a highlight for me. And you love seeing guys who have put in the work, truly earned the job, get their first opportunity. And look, we don't know what Mark Killum's going to do as a head coach. He could be the worst head coach in CFL history. There have been coordinators who everybody thought would be a great coach or deserved their opportunity, struggle to make the most of it. However, my prediction is that Mark Killum is going to be a very good head coach for the Edmonton Elks. He spent 20 years in Calgary. He had the full respect of the people in that program. He obviously helped that team win Grey Cup championships, and he was doing it as a guy who consistently got the bottom of the roster, right? That's what you're dealing with as a special teams coordinator. You don't get a whole heck of a lot of say in terms of who is running down the field for you, covering those punts and kickoffs or bringing them back, right? You are just kind of dealt, here's who you got. You better have them play well on Friday night, because if you don't, we're going to have a touchdown brought back on us and we're going to lose. And he did a tremendous job of that, motivating players, teaching players, and again, not dealing with the stars of the roster, who, by the way, still had the respect of Killum. I mean, Jake Mayer was tweeting about how much he enjoyed having Mark Killum in the building. Jake Mayer, I don't think, has ever covered a punt or kickoff in his life, but the respect and admiration that Mark Killum had from the bottom of that roster, I think, speaks volumes. So I think this is a great hire for the Elks. We talked about this on the show last week, JC. We thought it was a foregone conclusion, essentially. Rick Campbell was going to get this job, and as much as an even keel, relaxed, dare I say boring Rick Campbell might have been really appealing to Elks fans, given the kind of, I guess I'll use the word circus that things have been there for the past few years. Bringing in a guy like Mark Killum, I think, shows that Ed Hervey is not just using the 2015 playbook that he might have used in his first stint with the team. He's not using the same playbook that he had when he hired Rick Campbell to be the head coach in BC back in 2020. He's open to trying new things. He talked during his introductory press conference about being different this time around, and I give him credit as well. He is trying something new. He's trying something different. This evidently was a real hiring and interview process, because we all know in professional sports sometimes they're not. The person is very much preordained, pre-selected. So I give Hervey credit for that as well.
Yeah, I don't know much about the structure of the power grid in the city of Edmonton, but I suggest that if the mayor wants to maybe save his citizens some tax dollars, he can just take a big plug and shove it into the Edmonton Elks building right now, because they've got enough energy for everybody in that city between President Chris Morris and what he brought to his press conference, between this new Ed Hervey, who's apparently shooting from the hip and all fiery all the time, and Mark Killum and the passion we know he brings to the sideline. This is going to be a different, reinvigorated Edmonton Elks organization. And frankly, it's long overdue for Killum, who I think should have been hired the last time the Elks had an opening as their head coach, and instead that job went to Chris Jones. He has been waiting in the wings for far too long. Now, I know there are going to be critics out there who say, well, he got fired at the end of this season, and Calgary's special teams last year were not all that good, but I think you made a really salient point there, Hodge, at the end when you talked about a special teams coordinator having to deal with what they're given. And the reality is there is only one person who was making roster decisions for the Calgary Stampeders in terms of who was dressing, and that was Dave Dickens. Everybody else had to deal with what he chose, and whoever was on that roster being dressed for offense and defensive purposes, Mark Killum had to make a special teams unit out of those guys, whether they were bought in or not. I think he's done a remarkable job and was ultimately scapegoated by that organization. Hopefully, he can emulate what Jason Moss was able to accomplish just a few years ago in terms of being fired in less than ideal circumstances, becoming a head coach, and immediately having success, winning a Grey Cup. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility for a staff like this, because they are loaded with talent.
Well, let's talk about the coordinators here. I mean, Jordan Maximek has led one of the top offenses in the CFL for the past many years with the BC Lions. It is a pass-happy offense. That being said, I've been led to believe that O-line coach and run game coordinator Steven Sorrells will be kept on, which I think is fantastic news if you're an Elks fan, because this team ran the heck out of the ball in 2024. And as much as you want Jordan Maximek's deep offensive passing attack to click, whether it's Trey Ford, McLeod Bethel-Thompson, or whoever else at the helm we don't yet know, you don't want to lose that run game, because that type of attack is going to be not only very effective, but very fun to watch, I think, for Elks fans in 2025. And then defensively, you've got JC Sherritt, a guy who is a local legend, won a Most Outstanding Defensive Player award for the Elks, was named All CFL in 2012, and won a Grey Cup with this team in 2015. He's someone who is young, only 36 years old, who is recognizable for fans. Ed Hervey talked about this. Chris Morris talked about this. You want guys who will resonate with fans, bring them back to the cavernous, empty, increasingly decrepit Commonwealth Stadium. One way to do that, hey, our head coach is from here, our offensive coordinator is from here, and our defensive coordinator is a local legend. And Sherritt, no, he's never been a defensive coordinator in the CFL, but he was very much involved, of course, with that defense this past year in Saskatchewan under Corey Mace that had all kinds of success, bringing about the most takeaways of any defense in the league. So I'm bullish on this staff. I think it's a great staff. Probably as good as a first-time head coach could hope to put together in their first year at the helm.
Yeah, all three of these guys are absolute rising stars. And I'll speak to Jordan Maksimic a little bit as an OC because I got the chance to watch him more than most out here in BC. And yeah, there are things that he needs to evolve as a coordinator. He needs to be a little bit more flexible and able to adapt in game. He maybe needs to have Sorrells caution him not to go away from the run game so much. But what he's proven is that if you give him an offseason to work with a quarterback, he is going to get the very best out of that quarterback the next season. It happened with Nathan Rourke. It happened with Vernon Adams Jr., where they put up some historic numbers and were on absolutely exceptional paces because of his high-flying passing attack. Now he's got a guy, and still has to be re-signed, but it seems to be trending in the direction that Edmonton wants Trey Ford to be either the 1A or the undisputed number one there with that organization. A young player who has immense talent, both with his legs and with his arm. You give him somebody like Maksimic to teach him what to do, to put him in an offense that's built for him. I think the sky is truly the limit. And I think Trey Ford, looking at the deal before these coach hirings and after, it's a lot more attractive to go to Edmonton now than it was previously.
And while we're on the Trey Ford topic, I mean, I know we'll talk about this to death on the pod this offseason, depending on when, in fact, he re-signs with Edmonton. But it is absolute garbage that Trey Ford is a pending free agent. And I've written about this before. This is a guy who was drafted only 3 years ago. The Elks used a first-round pick on him. And obviously they didn't do an amazing job developing him consistently. They had him twisting in the wind for a while. They put him in. They didn't put him in. Chris Jones, publicly kind of said, well, he's not willing to go in and run the run packages that we want, which I've been led to believe was not really 100% true. Regardless, this team has invested a tremendous amount in this player. And now, after only 3 years, he's able to leave and they will get no compensation. And that is something that needs to change in the CFL. The same thing is true in Winnipeg with Tyrell Ford. He signed a 3-year rookie deal, spent the second year of that rookie deal looking for work in the NFL. He has only played 2 real CFL seasons, and now he is a free agent. Now, on the flip side, yes, players should absolutely have the opportunity to maximize their earnings. But in no other league are guys drafted and then 3 years later unrestricted free agents who can go anywhere. And I'm sorry, it's ridiculous that that is the case in this league. I've previously written columns about this. If you Google 3 Down Nation restricted free agency, you will find that column, and that lays out how I would do it. If there's some type of compensation system, great. Doesn't really matter to me how you do it. But there needs to be a way in this league where a player can sign for the most money possible, whether it's an offer sheet system like the NHL has, like every other league has a system where this makes sense. In the NFL, if you're a first round pick, you could get your 5th year option picked up. A first round pick 5 years, you can keep that player in the same city with the same team. And by the way, last I checked, CFL fans were crying, screaming that they want players to stay with the same teams instead of going to free agency every single year. I would love for the CFL to come up with a system where American players aren't automatically unrestricted free agents after 2 years and Canadian players aren't automatically unrestricted free agents after 3 years. There's a way to get it done where players are still going to be able to test the market and earn a boatload of money, but players are also not going to be losing guys who they drafted up high. Like another great example, Jalen Philpott. No, he's not had as much success as his twin brother Tyson has in Montreal, but the Calgary Stampeders used a top pick on him in 2022. He missed all of his second season due to injury. He missed parts of his first and third seasons due to injury. He's 24. Why is a 24-year-old an unrestricted free agent? Like, good for Jalen that he can go wherever he wants, but this system makes no sense to me. Nobody who has played, let's look it up. Jalen Philpott, I'm guessing, has dressed for fewer than 30 career games. And according to CFL.ca, he has dressed, 32. 32 games. I'm actually pretty sure that's wrong now that I'm looking at it in greater detail. But whatever. Let's pretend it's right. 32 games, 24 years old. He's not going to turn 25 till July. Like, he's going to be 24, and he's going to be going to free agency. I'm sorry. This makes no sense to me. It needs to be changed. But anyways, I'll get off my soapbox. Moving on. The BC Lions have hired former Winnipeg Blue Bombers offensive coordinator Buck Pierce as their new head coach. The former quarterback got his start in the CFL with the Lions back in 2005 and spent parts of 5 seasons with the team. Now he will make building a partnership with Canadian pivot Nathan Rourke a priority in order to right the ship in BC. Will that be a natural fit, and who do you see replacing Pierce in Winnipeg?
I'll leave the OC talk for you and dive into this dynamic between Buck Pierce and Nathan Rourke, because I really like the hire of Buck Pierce. I like Pierce as a person. I like him as a coach. I think he has a proven pedigree, and I think he can elevate Nathan Rourke's game given a full off-season working together and what he's been able to accomplish in the past with Zach Collaros and guys like Drew Brown as well. But there is some awkwardness to this, right? The Lions talked all year about, Nathan Rourke is struggling, but it's because he had 5 offenses in a year, right? That's just too much. He's got to settle down, be in the same system for a while, and that'll make it all better. Well, here, the year has not yet elapsed, Hodge, and they've given him a 6th offense. Now, he'll have the full off season to work with that. That's going to help. I have no doubt that Nathan Rourke will pick it up, but that is contrary to what the organization has said in the past. And on top of that, we talked about Jordan Maksimic going to Edmonton and how much we like him as a coach. Well, Nathan Rourke credited him for his 2022 season, and Maksimic's presence in BC was a big reason why he came back to the Lions. Now, at this critical juncture of his career, they've essentially, by not promoting Maksimic, sent his favorite coach packing. And Rourke is being a good soldier about it. He says he's behind the organization's vision. He's excited to work with Pierce and all the right things. But he also admitted, he would have liked to have spent another year working with Maksimic. And I don't blame him for that. Those two had a really good working relationship. So that means that Pierce is going to have to do some work here over the next couple months, building that relationship, spending time with Rourke, and getting the two of them on the same page. Because right now, it's a promising future, but it's a little bit of an awkward situation.
I think that's an astute observation, JC. And I will say the situation in BC. Why have we never called you BC as a joke? That's kind of funny that we haven't called you BC. This is an operations cap problem, right? The operations cap is flawed for many reasons. One of them is teams are terrified to give coaches any term on their contracts because they might have to fire that coach and eat the money, not only in terms of paying out the actual dollars, but then those figures will count against the operations cap for years to come. We've seen some teams be crippled by that and then potentially not bounce back on the field as quickly as otherwise would have if the operations cap wasn't a thing. I'm looking at you, Edmonton, post 2021, heading into 2022. That being said, the challenge for teams when they don't have their coaches under long-term contracts is the situation that unfolded in BC. Jordan Maximic, up-and-coming rising star OC. He applies for the head coaching job in BC, doesn't get it, and instead of staying on as OC, he's a free agent. He is not under contract for 2025. And lo and behold, he says, well, I'm going to go to my hometown team and try to beat the ever-loving snot out of you with them next year, BC. Have fun with that. And now he's off to Edmonton. And that situation isn't even a possibility, right? When coaches can be signed to long-term contracts. And yes, there's nothing stopping teams, technically speaking, I suppose, from signing coaches to long-term deals, except for that they will, of course, have to deal with the negative consequences of firing those coaches if push comes to shove. So maybe you can blame the BC Lions for this one. Personally, I don't, because CFL teams, given the operations cap, have to save themselves, right? So this situation wouldn't have unfolded the way it did if the operations cap did not exist. It's a flawed system, needs to be changed. Moving on. As for the actual hiring of Buck Pierce, we talked about this on last week's show, so I don't want to reiterate all of it. But yes, Buck Pierce is a special person, 100%. He has earned this opportunity 100%. I think it's funny that of the 9 head coaches now across the league, 4 are Canadian born and the other 5 are quarterbacks I watched when I was like a kid. And those are the only 2 groups. It's mid-2000s quarterbacks and Canadians. That's it, period, end of list for the 9 quarterbacks. 5 of them being former quarterbacks, which is funny. As for the OC job in Winnipeg, I've got a column up with the 8 candidates. Someone who I think deserves a special shout out, because I don't think this has been talked about nearly enough in the media as a whole, is Jarius Jackson, who of course went overlooked as head coach in Edmonton, applied for that job, interviewed for that job, did not get that job, with it of course going to Mark Killum. He did a sensational job, I thought, this past season. There were some growing pains, some hiccups in terms of the actual head coaching with some in-game decisions, but the team went 7-6 with him at the helm, and the offense was incredible. The Elks finished first in points per game, second in net offense, first in yards per rush, and second in yards per play. Those figures should be Grey Cup worthy. Of course, this team missed the playoffs because they allowed more points than anybody else in the CFL. So defensively, there were some big challenges. But offensively, the unit was off the chain. And I think that Marcus Howell deserves credit for that as well. Marcus Howell is another person on the list. He is not only someone who's worked closely with Jackson across a number of stops in the CFL, but he's from Winnipeg, played for the Blue Bombers for many years. And I didn't know this until speaking with Howell on Wednesday, but he finished his collegiate career at Texas Southern, but he actually spent the first year of his collegiate career with the University of Manitoba Bisons, where he was teammates with current president and CEO Wade Miller. Of course, they then became teammates again with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, but I did not realize that Howell was one day a Bison. I believe that was 1993. In my defense, I was 2, so I wasn't really in CFL circles at that point. I was more concerned about Legos and whatever 2-year-olds do. The person who I would suggest maybe is the front runner for the job is Kevin Burgoyne. And the reason I say that is because he has been with the Bombers for 7 years. If you look at the 2 changes that were made last offseason, with Mike Miller becoming the special teams coordinator in Winnipeg, with Jordan Younger becoming the defensive coordinator in Winnipeg, those are both internal hirings. Mike O'Shea is an internal kind of guy. I also am not sure if bringing in an outside person is best for 2025, considering that this team, by all accounts, by all appearances, is just planning to run it back this upcoming season. This is a big culmination for the Bombers in 2025. They're hosting the Grey Cup for the first time in 10 years. They're trying to play in the first home Grey Cup in franchise history. They've, of course, been to 5 straight with a veteran-laden team. I don't think with Mike O'Shea entering the last year of his contract, with Kyle Walters entering the final year of his contract. This is a year where they're going to say, yeah, let's blow it up and get younger and change our system offensively, blah, blah, blah. No, this is let's keep the vast majority of what we did last year intact, and let's keep the same offensive system. So I think for that reason, Burgoyne should probably be the one who gets the job. And he's also earned it, right? He's put in the work. 7 years in that organization, the last 4 as receivers coach. He knows the system through and through. He would, I think, provide Winnipeg with the most seamless opportunity. That being said, I wrote the column because I think all 8 of these potential candidates deserve some recognition. So please go ahead and read it.
It's going to be a fascinating storyline to watch, and it will determine the future of the Bombers. I mean, just a word of advice to the new OC. Best strategy, hand the ball to Brady Oliveira and make sure your quarterback can throw when you ask him to. Unfortunately, they didn't follow those instructions in the Grey Cup game. That's why they didn't win it, but hopefully going forward, they can maximize that philosophy. As for the Lions, they're in a similar boat in terms of determining coordinators and Buck Pierce's inaugural staff. We talked about it with Edmonton, how important that is for a young head coach, and there's a lot of question marks there. And Buck Pierce wasn't particularly forthcoming with his strategy in terms of who those coaches are going to be. He's going to call the plays. He said that definitively. There were some rumors one way or another that he maybe wanted to float as a head coach. That doesn't seem to be the case, although he didn't rule out potentially hiring an offensive coordinator who doesn't call the plays and handles some of those other duties in terms of game planning to give him that flexibility. And then there's a big question mark on the defensive side as well, because there is one coach in BC who's under contract going forward. That's Ryan Phillips, who has another year on his deal, despite last season's disappointing results. I think he's an exceptional defensive coordinator and a former teammate of Buck Pierce's. He'll get a chance to interview for that position, but there wasn't really an indication by the Lions or Pierce one way or another as to whether he'd be brought back. And unlike Rick Campbell, whose deal is a freebie under the football operations cap, if they decide to get rid of Phillips, they'll be on the hook for that money, and that will be taken out of their budget going forward. So there's some really serious questions that the Lions will have to answer in terms of what's going to be around Buck Pierce to support him in his first season.
You got to love the operations cap. There's nothing to be said for the, what a wonderful system it is. Great, great, great. CFL, got to love that system. Interesting stuff, interesting stuff.
The Hamilton Tiger Cats have hired Ted Goveia as their new general manager, replacing the departed Ed Hervey. The Burlington native has spent the past 10 seasons in Winnipeg, playing a critical role in building the roster that has been to 5 straight Grey Cup games. Is this a slam dunk move for the Tabbies?
I think it is. Ted Goveia has done a lot of the heavy lifting over his tenure in Winnipeg, and I think was a big part of what made this team such a success, right? I mean, you don't get to 5 straight Grey Cup games, winning 2, unless you're able to consistently build a roster from year to year. And you talk about people who've paid their dues. I think Goveia paid his dues and then some. Like, this is somebody who spent 15 years coaching at the U Sports level. He spent multiple years coaching with the Toronto Argonauts while also doing some personnel work. And now he has been in personnel with Winnipeg for over a decade. And Goveia does a lot of his own scouting. He does a lot of contracts in Winnipeg. I should say he did a lot of contracts in Winnipeg. Now, of course, in Hamilton. I just hope that he is given the full shake in Hamilton. We know from past situations there that Scott Mitchell, who's now a minority owner of the Tiger Cats, likes to have a say in personnel. Maybe that's something that would be best left to somebody who gets paid to do personnel. I would feel comfortable suggesting that. That being said, I also think this is a really good landing spot for a GM, right? You go into a situation where it's like, okay, we have a potential MOP quarterback. Yes, there's a contract dispute to work out there, but I think both sides are optimistic that something can get done. You've got a top offensive line in the CFL, and you've got some really good pieces defensively. Are there some things you need to work out, some areas you need to improve? Yes, of course. But I also think that the Hamilton Tiger Cats are going to have some money to spend here. And we know, by the way, that Ted Goveia and Scott Milanovich can get along well because they coached together back with the Toronto Argonauts, winning a Grey Cup together in 2012. So they have a long relationship. I don't think there's anything to worry about there. This is not going to be a situation where Ted fires the head coach and we have a complete new staff roll in. The staff, I've been led to believe, will either be entirely the same or very close to the same going from 2024 to 2025. So I don't think that Goveia should have had to wait as long as he did. Credit to him for being patient. And I think the Bombers are certainly going to miss him. The only thing I will say is I think they're going to miss him more beyond 2025 because, again, a lot of the work that I think he put in for next season is already done, right? Like bringing in your expanded practice roster, those types of things are the type of moves that you do as an assistant personnel person. I think the first time he's really going to have a chance to overdo the roster, if he wants to, is 2026. And he might very well get that opportunity, though. Who knows? The Tiger Cats could be one of, if not the team to beat in the East Division this upcoming year. They were certainly better, I think, than their record indicated in 2024.
Yeah, this hire is long overdue, and I'm thrilled for Ted to get this opportunity. I mean, very few people in the CFL work as hard as he has in the scouting realm, and the results have been shown on the field. There is some hesitation here, some worries about the situation in Hamilton because there's a lot of cooks in that kitchen in terms of not just Scott Mitchell and him putting his fingers into pies where maybe they don't belong, but also the fact that Orlando Steinhauer is still president of football operations there, which counts under the football operations cap and limits some things. How those divisions of duties work is a really interesting dynamic. I'm sure Ted will have on paper final say of the roster, but there's a lot of voices in there that will have to be managed. One thing I will say, you pointed out the connection to Scott Milanovich and the working relationship they had in Toronto. That's a huge boost for Goveia. The other thing that I think has flown a little bit under the radar here, Goveia was a formerly a member of the board of directors for Football Canada, which he served on the board alongside the Honorable Lois Mitchell, who just happens to be Scott Mitchell's mom. So he's got a direct line to Mommy Dearest. If things go wrong, I'm sure they have a strong working relationship there as well. I think that'll help Goveia going forward.
I will call your mom is a great comeback to any potential conflict, whether it's personal, professional, whatever. Shout out my mom who listens to this podcast every week and moms everywhere. We love moms. Moms are heroes, JC. They really are.
They are indeed.
But regardless of how this unfolds in Hamilton, this was a good hiring. Goveia, again, should not have had to wait until 2024, going into 2025, to get a GM job. He's earned it. Will he be good at it? Again, we don't know. He could be the worst GM hire in CFL history. But if I were to bet money on it, I think this is going to be a good hiring for Hamilton. I think it's going to age well. I think Goveia is a hard worker. I think he treats people with respect, goes about business the right way. And there's a reason why the Toronto Argonauts were successful and he was there. And the Winnipeg Blue Bombers became very successful not long after he got to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. So I think that this is a slam dunk for the Tiger Cats. This is a good person to have setting the culture in your building and filling your roster. Canadian quarterback Curtis Rourke threw a school record 6 touchdowns in Indiana's blowout win over Purdue last week, then earned second team All Big Ten honors and an invite to the East-West Shrine Bowl. Which of those is the biggest deal?
Well, the biggest deal is going to be whichever playoff game Indiana gets set up with when that's finally announced on Sunday. But a close second, I think, is the East-West Shrine Bowl because that's sort of being positioned to overtake the Senior Bowl as the premier all-star event in college football for NFL scouts. And one of the other quarterbacks in attendance for that game, Hodge, is Shedeur Sanders, who is already committed and is projected to be the top quarterback off the board, potentially even the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft. It'll be really good for Rourke to get a side-by-side comparison with Shedeur and be able to impress scouts in that setting. I think it could really boost his stock. But I wanted to bring up this topic for one reason, and that's the 6-touchdown game. He is one of 3 quarterbacks to accomplish that for Indiana. One of them did it back in the 50s, so we won't talk about him. Can you name the other modern-era quarterback to throw 6 touchdowns for the Indiana Hoosiers?
Okay, I promise I didn't look this up. Did Trey Roberson play at Indiana?
Boom! You got it.
Oh,
yes!
I'm so proud of that.
He also did it against Purdue, which probably speaks terribly about the Purdue Boilermakers. But yes, Curtis Rourke and Trey Roberson, cornerback for the Calgary Stampeders, share an Indiana Hoosiers passing record.
That's wild. Especially considering Curtis Rourke, or at least his rights, could be claimed by the Calgary Stampeders with the first overall pick in this year's draft. I remembered Trey Roberson was a college quarterback. I remembered it was in the Big Ten. Admittedly, I was not sure it was Indiana. So I'm glad that I guessed that right and look smart on this podcast for a change. That's great. Interestingly, I thought that him being named Rourke, that is being named second team, was kind of a joke. Like the guy from Oregon who got the first team nomination did not have nearly the stat line that Rourke did, though I appreciate that the Ducks are 12-0. You know, Indiana is 11-1, but if it's just going to go to the quarterback on the best team, then what's the point? Like, just look at the standings, and those are the awards. Why have awards that people are voting on? But whatever. I'm not going to try to tell college people how to do their jobs. I don't know college football well enough to have an opinion on that. I just what do you think? Should he have been first?
Yes, I think Curtis Rourke should have been first team. I think he's statistically better than Dylan Gabriel, but those things between media voters going with the best team and coaches, which tend to privilege the most dominant teams in the conference, I think he was up against it in that circumstances. The good news is none of that really matters. Nobody cares about it when it comes to your professional future. It's just an accolade that you get to brag about when you're old and gray.
Or young and gray, as I was.
This is true.
Now I'm middle-aged and none. It's now time for Hodge's Heritage
You still got
Moment.
hair on your face?
Yeah, that's true. I will always have hair on my face. On this day in 2008, the Montreal Alouettes signed free agent receiver Andrew Hodgins. The diminutive speedster started just 7 games over 2 seasons with the team, recording 41 receptions for 457 yards and 5 touchdowns. Hawkins departed for the NFL in 2011 and quietly enjoyed an outstanding career down south, during which he made 209 catches for 2,419 yards and scored 9 times with Cincinnati and Cleveland. The cousin of all-time CFL great Geroy Simon retired from the NFL in 2017 after graduating from Columbia with a master's degree. He now serves as a host and analyst on a variety of sports and football-related shows. JC, I always think of Andrew Hawkins as one of the weirdest CFL to NFL stories in that he wasn't, no disrespect to him, he just wasn't a tremendously successful CFL player. He was kind of a role player, kind of a backup. And typically, you have to be a star to go from the CFL to the NFL. This proved that's not always the case.
Well, he's got a bizarre story as well because he competed for his first NFL opportunity on a football reality show hosted by Michael Irvin. I don't know if you knew this, Hodge.
I did not know that.
It was 4th and long, and it was to win the last spot on the Dallas Cowboys roster. He did this in 2009, shortly after he signed with the Alouettes, and he lost out. He was the second last guy cut, or the last guy cut before the winner, and that's why he ended up in the CFL. But got his name out there, I guess, got on the radar of scouts, and went on to have one of the most successful careers for a former CFL receiver, especially considering what he was up here.
Well, and like I mentioned that his cousin is G. Roy Simon, because first of all, I think it's an interesting tidbit, but then also, like, G. Roy Simon became a CFL megastar and never got a sniff down south, even when he was putting up MOP numbers, right? He came close to 2,000 yards multiple times. No NFL interest. Andrew Hawkins, who is tiny, right? Like 5'8", I think played at 185, maybe 190 pounds, got an NFL look after playing 7 games over 2 years with the Alouettes. It's just wild how these things play out. But full credit, I don't want to sound disrespectful to Hawkins. He had a great NFL career and is obviously an unbelievably smart person. I mean, Columbia is literally Columbia, right? It is one of the most prestigious post-secondary institutions in the world. So success on and off the field for him. We love that. Kudos to Andrew Hawkins. It's now time for the 3-minute drill. Ticats assistant general manager Spencer Zimmerman is reportedly headed to Edmonton to join his former boss, Ed Hervey. Is that a good move?
I think it's a great move. I've got a lot of respect for Zimmerman's work, and I think he'll support Hervey well with the Elks. Rookie Canadian tight end Theo Johnson could miss the remainder of the season for the New York Giants after suffering a foot injury. How much does that suck?
It really sucks because Johnson, I thought, went later in the 2024 NFL draft than he should have gone, and he was just starting to make some really big plays for a team that doesn't have a whole lot of playmakers. So sucks that he's not able to be showcased a little more toward the end of the season. Legendary quarterback Ricky Ray told Edmonton Sports Talk last month that he would turn down a CFL coaching job if offered one. Was that a surprise?
Wasn't really. Ray hasn't been as explicit about this in the past, but he has indicated he wasn't ready to coach yet while his kids were still young. The most surprising thing from this interview, Hodge, Ricky Ray is now, as a hobby, he's taken up competitive distance running. Imagine being the person who loses out on a race against Ricky Ray. That's just something I never thought was possible. Canadian offensive lineman Kyle Hergel has been signed to the New Orleans Saints active roster for the second time this season. Will he ever suit up for Saskatchewan?
I think there's a chance he could end up with the Riders, but that being said, I mean, this is the dream for an undrafted guy. Hergel has been on and off the active roster all year, has played meaningful snaps as an undrafted rookie in the NFL. That is more or less your ceiling with very few exceptions. So if he is proven over the course of this year, or can prove over the course of this year, that he deserves that spot and can reasonably play, then that sets him up, I think, really well to earn a full-time job in 2025, potentially even as a starter. So I think the odds of him ending up in Saskatchewan eventually have gotten slightly lower as this year has gone on. WWE announcer Michael Cole gave the BC Lions a shout-out during Survivor Series in Vancouver. Was that an appropriate tribute?
It was, and it's good to see the WWE recognizing a league that has produced so much talent for them in the past, including Roman Reigns, who I believe won his group cage match in that Survivor Series. Future Hall of Fame left tackle Stanley Bryant has signed a 1-year extension with the Blue Bombers, claiming he's, quote, still the best guy in the league, unquote. Is that true, Hodge?
No, I thought the best offensive, or left tackle, I should say, in the CFL this past year was Martez Ivey at Edmonton. That being said, I thought after a bit of a down year in 2023, Stanley Bryant did have a very good year in 2024. So I think it makes sense that he's back. As I mentioned earlier in the show, the Bombers, I think, are largely going to run it back in 2025, keeping that core intact to try to make a 6th straight Grey Cup. Obviously, Bryant is a big part of that. 4-star quarterback Blake Habert led a long list of Canadians to ink their NCAA letters of intent on early signing day, landing at the University of Notre Dame. Could the Maple Ridge product be the future of the Fighting Irish?
He very well could be. A lot of people are high on this kid as a dual threat quarterback. And going forward, his blind side might also be protected by a fellow Canadian, Will Black, the number 1 ranked recruit out of this country, a 5-star offensive tackle, also signed with the Fighting Irish. That could be quite the tandem going forward. The Houston Texans elevated Canadian receiver Jared Wayne from the practice roster last week, allowing him to dress for his first NFL game. How cool is that?
It's very cool. I mean, Wayne is a relatively big body target. I want to say 6'3", 215. That being said, he's got super quick feet. He's got agility that you don't often see for players of that size. So I'm excited to see what he can do with the Houston Texans attack. The BC Lions have signed CJFL standout Elion Noah. Can he make an impact in the CFL?
I'm certainly intrigued to see what he brings to training camp. Before he was with the Okanagan Sun and breaking records there, he was at Utah State, briefly with Boise State, and he broke Reggie Bush's all-time high school record for rushing yards. This guy is legit. I think he could potentially be a diamond in the rough. The Montreal Alouettes have re-signed defensive backs Najee Murray and Wesley Sutton, as well as Canadian running back Sean Thomas Erlington. Which of those moves is most impactful?
I would probably, of those three, pick Sutton. I think they're all good players, but Sutton, I think, does a really nice job of holding down that boundary halfback spot, which oftentimes means you're facing the best receiver on the opposing team. So if I had to pick one of those three, I'd go with Wesley Sutton, savvy vet in this league. Veteran defensive tackle Derek Wigan announced his retirement from the CFL last week after 9 seasons. How will you remember his career?
I'll remember him as a stout, gritty defensive tackle, the type of guy who does the dirty work, but most importantly, I'll remember him for his contributions off the field. He was always a guy who was in the community, always a high character guy, former President's Ring recipient in Calgary. I think that will be his legacy from his playing career. Former CFL linebacker Alex Singleton has been named the Denver Broncos nominee for Walter Payton NFL Man of the Year. Is that well deserved?
It is. I mean, this is considered one of the highest honors in the NFL. Every team nominates one person. That creates a pool of 32, and then a winner is picked. Getting this nod is, I think, a very big deal. Alex Singleton, we have a full list of his accolades, obviously, on this website. But, I mean, even just the work alone that he does with his sister, Ashley, who is a Special Olympian, is commendable enough. The fact that he's out there doing all kinds of other stuff is all the more impressive, and all the more reason he is still so beloved by CFL fans, despite the fact that he's been down south now for like 6 years. It's amazing how much he is still beloved north of the border, and I think he knows how much he is beloved by CFL fans to this day. For JC Abbott, I'm John Hodge. We thank you as always for listening to the 3 Down Nation podcast. We were delayed by a day this week because JC yesterday on Wednesday was covering the Buck Pierce press conference out in Surrey, British Columbia. Moving forward, we hope to be on Wednesdays throughout the off season, probably taking 1 week off at Christmas. We'll see you then.